As I mentioned earlier, this week we read one of the most famous stories in the Hebrew Bible, that of Noah and the flood. We're all pretty familiar with the flood, I take it, so let's talk about Noah for a bit. Think for a minute. What do you know about Noah? Not about what he did, but about who he was. I'm going to guess the answer is not much. As Professor Carol Ox observes, Noah's more of the strong, silent type. Strong enough to single-handedly build an ark, that we know, but silent enough that he does not utter a single word for the first 4 chapters of his own story. We know what Noah did, but we have literally no idea of what Noah thought. There comes a point in the story where Noah needs to shoe in the last of the animals. He needs to waterproof the last panel of gopher wood. He needs to batten down the final hatch. There comes a time when the clouds begin to form, that liminal period just before the waters come. There comes a time when Noah steps off the dry ground, but before he closes the hatch. When he looks out for one last time, he looks out at a world that he knows is doomed, that is out there before him. What could possibly go through his mind in that moment before the first drops of rain begin to fall? The Torah doesn't tell us. Until he opens his mouth, all we know of Noah is what the Torah does describe about him and about the actions that he completes. But that does give us a fair amount to work with. At the end of last week's portion, we are introduced to Noah, and we learn that he found favor with Adonai. At the start of this week, we read that Noah was an ish tzaddik, a righteous person, and that he was tamim bedoratav, blameless or pure in his entire generation. And finally, et ha'elohim hitalech Noach. Noah walked with God. That is an extraordinary introduction. To put it in perspective, next week, when we meet Abraham, he's described as, well, he's not described at all, other than being the son of Terach. But that's it. The same is true for Moses. Now, in both of these cases, Abraham, Moses, they rise to the occasion of divine call, but there is zero indication of their righteousness prior to receiving it. And yet Noah, before he does a single thing, he is described as a tzaddik. Abraham is mentioned in the Torah more than 25 times after his death. Moses, his name alone is one of the most common words in the entire Torah. But Noah, his story ends with him. Once he dies, we don't see his name again in the 5 books of Moses. Why is that? Noah, he was blameless in his generation, the best of all that walked in the earth. I'm going to offer a personal analogy here that I think might be helpful. As some of you might know, in addition to being a rabbi, I also happen to be a retired competitive eater. It's true. Retired competitive eating champion, I should add. The best of all who competed, in fact. That sounds impressive. No, it is impressive. Until you find out that my competition was a bunch of other rabbinical students. Context matters. And believe it or not, our tradition uses the same analogy with Noah. They compare him to a coin. Sure, in a jar of pennies, a nickel stands out. But at the end of the day, it's still a nickel. Noah was the best in his generation, the rabbis teach. It's just like me being the best competitive eater in a rabbinical school. In other words, it's kind of a low bar. But best of his generation, that's not the only compliment bestowed upon Noah, nor is it the only rabbinic tradition that finds fault with. Noah walks with God. What could possibly be wrong with that? Midrash teaches that Noah walked with God only because he was incapable of supporting himself. Contrast that to Abraham, who walked before God, Rashi paraphrases it as this: Noah needed support, but Abraham strengthened himself and walked in his righteousness by himself. There's a bit of a tradition of downplaying Noah, but given the initial praise bestowed upon him, what could be the reason for this denigration? In 2 weeks, we'll read a similar story of destruction in the Torah. Instead of a flood, it's fire and brimstone. Instead of a planet, it's confined to Sodom and Gomorrah. But a lot in these two stories is the same. Humanity has fallen, wickedness has prevailed, a single person is offered safety. In the case of Noah, God says, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. And Noah did so, just as God commanded him, so he did. The Zohar offers the following commentary in the name of Rav Yehuda. And Noah held his peace and said not, neither did he intercede. Whereas Abraham, when told of God's plan regarding Sodom and Gomorrah, responded by asking, will you, God, destroy the righteous with the wicked? It's an extraordinary moment in our Torah. Here's Abraham confronted with an omnipotent God who is prepared to destroy his neighbors. And Abraham has the courage to advocate on their behalf. And you know the story. He first asks God to save the city if he can find 50 righteous people within it. And when God says yes, Abraham, he asks again. He says, what about 45? And again, a divine yes. And again, Abraham asks, 40, yes, 30, yes, 20, yes, 10, yes. God tells Abraham he plans to destroy these towns, and Abraham advocates for them. And not just once, 6 times. All for people he does not know and is told are sinful. And Noah? We know he had a lot of time to think while he built that ark. He had that climactic moment of staring out at the world one last time. And Noah, what did Noah say? Nothing. Allow me to share a poem by Elaine Rose Glickman, written from the perspective of Noah's wife. My mother and sisters, there would be no room for them. God had been very specific, my husband said, on this point, as on all the others. How long, how tall, how deep, how many windows, 1, how many animals, lots, and how everyone else would die. The story of Noah, it is not about shipbuilding. It is not about pairs of animals, and it's not even about rainbows. It's about what God expects of us and what our tradition expects of us. Many of us might think that the whole point of all of this, of religion, is to just be a good person. Follow those commandments. Support your synagogue. Don't take the last oneg cookie. But it turns out being good is not good enough. Noah was a good person, and yet his ethical character is described by Nahama Leibowitz as limited in his horizons and belonging to those who are satisfied to save their own souls. Once the waters recede, we don't hear from Noah again all the way until the book of Ezekiel. And there we read that Noah's righteousness was enough to save exactly him and only him. A nickel, it's better than a penny, but it ain't no quarter. Earlier this week at the Facing History dinner, the journalist Eli Saslow gave the keynote address. He spoke at length about his experience meeting a man named Derek Black. He was a leader in the white nationalist movement who ultimately renounced his ideology. One line from that talk has stayed with me over the last few days. Eli said, "It's not enough to say that you're not racist. In fact, you can't be not racist. You're either anti-racist or you're racist." What's true when it comes to racism is true for all of our societal evils. We're either fighting them or we're perpetuating them. In the course of the opening chapters of our Torah, our tradition offers 2 views of ethical conduct. The first, which we read in this week's portion, is where you live admirably, you cause no harm. And if your neighbors are drowning, well, hey, they should have built their own ark. The other model says, not that you should do something on those people's behalf, but that you must do something. And in fact, you must do everything, even for people you don't know or care for, even for people who you think deserve what is coming for them. I realize that's a big ask. Realistically, it's unlikely any of us will be single-handedly saving entire cities. But make no mistake, our tradition is clear when it comes to which of these models is raised up, which is remembered and is seen as the goal that we are supposed to strive for. Which one is held up is that of the patriarch of our religion, and which one, as Martin Buber called, is simply a man of the soil who is rescued from a flood. Being a good person is not enough. When God told Abraham the cities were going to be destroyed, the Torah is clear. This was a test. God wanted Abraham to challenge him. When God told Noah it was time to go inside the ark, that too was a test. And Noah failed. May we learn from his mistake, and may we find room in our ark for all of God's creatures. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will.